They need to hear what's called prosody. It's a big fancy word for they need to hear how you talk, what your phrasing is, what your vocabulary, your choice of words, expression, all of that. When a child is exposed to a lot of that before they ever see books or start to read and decode themselves, it really makes for a better reader, a more skilled reader. So what I'm telling parents is very simple. Talk to your children. With this added layer that we have, that I didn't have when my kids were growing up, of having technology so available, there is a tendency, and it's, I will admit, it's easy for parents to be in the same room as children and children to be on their technology. Parents can use technology as somewhat of a babysitter, and the thing is, it works, right? It occupies your children. But research is telling us that technology does not have a good influence on children. In fact, recent research shows that use of technology for young, and we're not talking just babies, and we're talking babies through, adulthood. It actually destroys some of the gray matter in the brain. So we're talking pretty serious effects here. So instead of that, I'm saying put down your technology and simply talk to your children and let your children talk to you. They need to hear all that. And again, all that adds up to chances for your children being better readers when they actually get to school. Part of this oral piece is called phonemic awareness. And I don't know if you've ever heard all of that, but phonemic awareness is merely the spoken words. And so it's vocabulary, but there's certain skills that our children need to be taught. There is a sheet I hope you got, and it's kind of a ladder of the phonemic awareness continuum. So for children to be good readers before they ever see words even, they need to have certain oral skills. So those include rhyming. Can your child recognize 2 words that rhyme? Can they hear 3 words, 2 of which rhyme and 1 doesn't, and identify which one is the odd man out, right? The one that doesn't rhyme. If you give your child a word, can they come up with 3 rhyming words out of their own mind? Back in the day, I'm a lot older than all of you. When we were raising our children, we played lots of sing-song games with rhymes in them, nursery rhymes, and it doesn't seem to be as popular to do, or maybe parents just don't have time to do. That is a really simple thing you can do. Get a hold of nursery rhymes and just say them. Read them in a book. Your children don't have to memorize them, but they're learning to recognize. In their ear, they're recognizing the rhymes. Some of the other skills in phonemic awareness, that preparation for learning to read, are the children need to be able to identify that words have sounds. So if you said the word cat, they should at some point be able to identify the 3 different sounds, or just simply that words are made up of individual sounds. Cat, at, and you can play a simple game of just saying, what word am I saying? At, and your child hears it and they blend it together, cat. Or the opposite, say cat, and your child can tell you what sounds are in there. So that's really important. Another thing is just knowing that we speak in sentences and books are in sentences. Being able, your child having the knowledge that there are sentences, that words are broken up. It's not with just one big mass of list of words, but they're broken up into sentences. Those are all, again, prerequisites to being a good reader. Identifying what compound words are. Before a child ever reads, you can talk about playground, haircut, and get them familiar with that idea that 2 words that have meaning on their own can be pushed together to make a totally new word. And they don't even have to know those are compound words, though that can happen later in their schooling, but just being able to do that. So those kinds of things are important, and we will talk later about 10 things parents can do, some ideas, lots of ideas for you. And I'd like for you to be, as you hear this, I'd like for you all to be thinking about things you already do that fall into these categories that we're talking about so that you can share them. We can share them with each other. I often say that many minds are better than just one mind who thinks, you might think I know it all, and I certainly don't. I learn things all the time, every day about this whole area of reading. So be thinking about that in terms of, hey, I do that already. That's a good activity. So again, just to reiterate, before your child ever gets into school, you can really set them up for success by reading to them. I just tutored a student today, a second grader for dyslexia, and I said to ask his dad, you and your wife ever have a chance to read to your child? And he said, no, nobody ever told me to do that, or nobody ever told me that was important. It is so important to read to your child. You can start when your children are still in the womb. For those of you who may be having more or know somebody who's pregnant, read to your children before they're even born, but certainly after. And for many years, children never outgrow, I think, they may say it, but I don't ever think that they outgrow the desire to be read to. Reading to a child has all kinds of wonderful things created in the brain. The brain is doing great things when you read to a child. And we need to remember that no matter how old they are, they need to be read to. I've been at many charter schools, and most of them suggest that parents try to read to their children 20 minutes every single day. Now, I understand that you have lives and that lives are busy sometimes when you take your multiple kids to multiple appointments and sports and music lessons and all that. But a goal for you might be read to your child 20 minutes a day. It is really, really important. That can happen way before the child gets in school, but after they're in school, if you would kind of make that your goal. And like I said, this dad today said, nobody ever told me that. And I thought, gosh, in my world, in my literacy world, that's like one of the big things. But obviously, all schools and all populations are not being told to read, the importance of just reading to your children. So please do that. The value of talking to your child is so important. And let your child talk. I heard somebody in a conference recently say, we want our little ones, our toddlers, to talk and to imitate our sentences or whatever. And then they get into school where they're told, don't talk. Be quiet while the teacher talks. It's good if your child talks. It has to be appropriate, obviously, but at home, encourage those conversations. And I would say again, not to beat a dead horse, but you'll hear me say this a few times, put down the technology and just have a conversation with your child. This generation, a book I recently read about the research with this generation of children that we have right now. It's a little scary, honestly, to me. Children can sit in a room with their technology across from each other and not have a conversation. That's not good for their brains. It's not good for their reading. It's really not good for their character or anything else. So you as parents, you're going to be the ones that make the difference in that whole area, and just talk to your children. So I have parents ask me, I have a list of questions that I'm going to go through that parents have asked me over the years about reading and helping your child with reading. And then afterwards, I'll go through, it's a PDF, 10 things parents can do to support their child's literacy. We'll go through that. And then we'll have questions. Please feel free, if we're talking about something and you have a burning question, just put it in the chat and we can stop for a second. I find that any question that one person has is probably a question that a lot of more people have, and it's worth talking about. So I invite you to do that.
Holly, we do have one question.
Yes.
Somebody asked, does books on tape count? Well, Holly asked, does books on tape count for reading 20 minutes a day?
So I would say better than nothing, but no, not optimal. They need to hear you, parents, talking, not a professional speaker. If you want to do that in addition to reading to your children, yes, do it. But it does not take the place of parents talking. It's convenient, I know, but there are other things beside that happen when you read to a child relationally. It creates a pretty amazing bond as you read with your children. This is not anything that can be replaced by a voice on a tape, even a good book. In addition to the oral language and the changing in the brain, so many amazing relational things happen when you read to your children. So I would say not optimal. It's a good question. Any more, Kristen?
Somebody just asked, so what about kids who are excellent readers, 5 years ahead, but hate to read? What would you say to that?
That is very tricky. I have a grandson who started reading, taught himself basically at 3 years old, and he's in college now, and he doesn't like reading anymore. A couple things you can do. I think one thing is finding good books that are interesting to that person. That is something I would say don't push too hard. And I would always keep up and offer to read to that person, to the student. When you read to a child, the kind of rule of thumb is that you always read to a child above their reading level. So if they're a second grader reading at a fifth grade level, then read to them from a not an adult, but an older book, a book maybe that's a classic, but is more at their grade level, but more difficult in terms of the syntax, the way the language is put together, more difficult vocabulary. Yes, so those are some things that you can do. Please don't give up on and just let that child go because they don't enjoy it anymore. Reading needs to be a part of their world. And everybody I believe, has some area of interest that you can capture if you figure it out with your child. And you know your children better than anybody else. Anything else for now, Kristen? Okay. So I have one of the questions I have asked a lot by parents is that once they get into school, the children need to know the sounds of the letters. So is it important for the children to know their ABCs? And the answer is absolutely yes. Again, we have a bunch of research that tells us that children who can recognize their letters and say them by name before they ever get to sounds is a really good setup for being a good reader. I'm going to talk a little bit about our favorite thing, which is the ABC song. Well, my child can sing the ABC song. Does that count? The answer is no, it doesn't. And I was, the kids that I work with actually taught me that. I taught kindergarten for years. So here's the thing. Singing music is a different avenue to the brain than reading and then saying alphabet letters and such. So what happens is the children memorize this as a tune, but they don't really understand what the song represents. So I've had kids say, I know my alphabet, and they'll A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and I'll say, okay, so I show them a letter. Which one is that? No idea. In fact, I said, what letter is LMNO? Because many children think LMNO it's part of the song, right? So it must be a letter, and they have no idea what they're singing are individual letter names. So it's fine if your child wants to do that, but it's not going to teach them our ABCs. What teaches them ABCs is just so simple. Go to Walmart, get a deck of those alphabet cards, and just you can do it for 3 minutes a day, and it'll make a huge difference with our little ones, or ones who I work with who struggle with reading. They're dyslexic, they're evaluated for dyslexia, and they just simply need more practice. Flashcards are so easy, and it doesn't have to be something that you do as a chore or a painful exercise. You can make it fun. I've had parents tell me they sit in carpool and they have a deck of cards with them, and the alphabet cards go up, and the kids in the back seat practice just naming the letters. They should especially learn the lowercase letters, because that is mostly what children see, right? We see capitals when we see names or places, our own names. Children should know how to write their name, but they need to know and to recognize lowercase letters. So yes, knowing your alphabet is a super important activity. Children who haven't learned them by the time they're in kindergarten are at a deficit. I've taught at kindergarten at many different schools, and it seems more and more children are coming in ill prepared. There's probably lots of reasons for that. But if you could get a little bit of a head start on that, or if you have a child who's struggling in second grades, I work with a sixth grader who had to relearn or learn for the first time the names of the alphabet. She told me she'd never been taught in school. It didn't seem that important. And she's dyslexic, but she was never taught that. So that is really, really important. And it's something that can be done very, very easily. I asked my students, point to the A, point to the Z, point to the J, point to the G. There's some letters that get mixed up. What's the difference between an M and an N? So they can see that. Again, just an alphabet strip or cards can be really an easy tool, but it makes such a difference that they can know that. And let me talk a little bit about the alphabet and writing. When I taught kindergarten for many years, most of the students came in and said, I can write my name, and it was all in capitals. And so we had, as teachers, we had to teach them the lowercase letters. You can do your child a favor if he or she is not in school yet and teach your child to write their name. They can do it if they're taught with one capital letter at the beginning, because proper nouns start with capital letters and the rest lowercase letters, even if they don't form the letters the way the school teaches, or they don't even form them correctly. It's okay. They should be able to write their name by the time they enter kindergarten with a capital letter and lowercase letters. Do you have any questions about that, parents? I'm going to take that silence as a no. Is that right, Kirsten?
So I'm trying to think of, there are some people that are asking questions now.
Okay.
The questions before that weren't about the alphabet, but
okay.
Dyslexia, and how do you approach reading different with a child that has dyslexia? A question that kind of tagged on that was wondering more when dyslexia is diagnosable versus a student just having issues with reading.
Okay. So, such great questions. And I am going to ask for your patience, because I'm going to talk about that at the end of my talking here in depth, if you can hang on. It's a whole other world and subject. So if we can hang on, I will go into it, I promise. But those are great questions. Do you see anything else?
Another question was, Angie was just adding that she knows the typical child need to learn language with listening to their parent and hearing sounds. She has a child that is deaf, hard of hearing. So she learned differently with tons of language access, but not initially through sound.
Okay.
Story.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, that's good. Okay. So that's alphabet. There are, if you Google alphabet activities, there are more than you could ever possibly fit into your day, I promise. That would make it fun. If you want to go to that, the time and the effort, I know homeschool parents are, in my opinion, the experts at this. They find such fun activities. Please know that is a great thing, but you don't have to hurt yourself by coming up with the most creative crafts. My husband calls them crafts for teachers. You don't have to do that in order to teach your child, in order for them to learn their alphabet. But there are activities there if you really want to do that. So let me go ahead and start on this. I hope you have access to this PDF, and it's 10 things parents can do to support their children's literacy. And I purposely gave you sort of a blank version because I'm a teacher and I want you to write your own answers, and forgive me for that, but I'm not going to give you the answers. I will give you the answers, but you're going to have to write them. because research shows that when people write the answers, it sticks in the memory more. So it's purposeful, I promise. So the first thing is read to your child. We talked about that. And then after you read with a child or read to a child, ask questions. And generally, we tend to ask what are called closed-ended questions. And that would be where there is one answer. So Little Red Riding Hood, tell me 3 characters in the story. Well, that's pretty closed. Children can do that. And that's a good first step. But really to get them thinking, to use those higher level thinking skills, think about other things you can ask, like, I'm going to read some of the things I put down now. These are things that your child might have to use their imagination to answer. They're not right directly from the book, okay? So what character do you think is most like yourself, child, and why? How could the story have ended differently? Can you think of a different way the story might end that might be better than how it ended? What do you think happened to this character after the story ended? How might you have changed somebody in the story? Who do you really relate to in the story? That is just a very small example of the kinds of questions that you can ask. Those are open-ended. There are many answers, and it might feel a little awkward at first for parents to be asking those kinds of questions. But I promise you, once you start, maybe even if you're reading a book and a chapter in a book, maybe beforehand, think through some questions like that you might want to ask your child to get conversation going and get your child thinking. What I guarantee you, once you start doing that, it'll become more natural to you, and you will be able to think of questions like that more easily. So that's one thing. All right, here's a funny thing to help your child with reading, and again, it's the oral language. Have dinner together. Novel idea, right? For some of our families, we're so busy, we're running in so many directions. Try as many nights as possible to have dinner together. And hopefully, in addition to eating, there'll be another valuable activity, and that will be talking to each other. So we used to do, there are many ideas, but we used to do a question of the day. I did this in some of my charter schools I worked at too. So a question of the day might be as simple as, what's the best thing that happened in your day? What's the worst? And then some things like, let's see, if you could be invisible for a day, what would you do? If you could be a superhero, which one would you choose and why? If you could go to any place in the world, where would you like to visit and why? If you could be brave for one day, no fear, what would that day look like? Those kinds of questions. Again, if you Google it, there's a bazillion ideas for those, but they're so great. Here's the thing. They hear conversation. They might hear ideas from their siblings. They get to know you as parents, and you get to know them. Get a little look at your child in maybe a different way. And it really creates that language piece. I feel like it's a really good relational thing again in a family. And if you can't have dinner every night, that's okay. Make a goal for yourself of what works for your own family. When I was in the classroom, I always said, you have to do what is best for your family. For some families, 7 nights a week is doable. For others, 2 nights a week is all they can squeak out. And that's okay. But set your own goal. If you're married, talk to your spouse. Even talk to your children about how many days you would like to set as your goal. And if you're not there, you're not there. It's okay, as long as you're making progress in that direction. So have dinner with your family. Do we have any questions about those? I'm going to stop every once in a while and just ask for questions. Kirsten, I'm kind of throwing that ball your way.
No questions right now.
Okay, great. So, how much time do we all spend in the car together? A lot, I'm afraid. Whether it's trips or carpooling or going to back and forth to appointments or grocery stores, whatever it is. My suggestion is make good use of your car time. Turn off the radio, although music is great too, but turn off the radio and talk with your children. You can play alphabet games in the car. You can play name games in the car, rhyming games. One of my kids' favorites was when we went on a trip, we would just look at license plates and who can spot a license plate with that has a as a first letter? Who can find one with B? Those kinds of things, or just simply reading a sign as you go by. So that let's see, Walmart. The first part of Walmart is wall. Who can think of rhyming words with wall? Wall, ball, crawl, those kinds of things. There are so many things you can do in the car. Alphabet knowledge, like I said, or sounds, or silly rhyming with a child's name. That's a fun one they like to do. Children love, don't we all, to hear our own name spoken. And so, you can play those kinds of games in the car. You can ask them things like, do gate and freight rhyme? Can you think of a third word that rhymes with gate? Those kinds of things. So make good use of that car time. We talked about reading to your children at least 20 minutes a day. And again, there is no shame from me or anybody else if you cannot make that happen every day. And it's 15 instead of 20 one night. It's really okay. I think you just, as a family, you set your own goals. And again, making progress, I feel like is the really the big goal here. If you can make 20 minutes 2 times a week, then that's great. Keep doing that. Another fun thing is to have a family reading night. This is a night where every member of the family sits down in the same room with their own book and they read. And I really believe this shows children that reading is an important activity. It's something my older brother likes to do. It's something my mom and dad like to do, maybe even grandparents over sometimes. But that creates an atmosphere where literacy and reading is important. Along with that, I really suggest, and you have to be careful with this, parents, but I think children are fascinated by what their parents are reading. The fact that their parents are reading at all, I think is pretty fascinating. If you're reading a good, wholesome book, I would say that you can share with your child. Why not over dinner or during this reading time, stop and just say, I love this book I'm reading. It's about this, and this is what I really like about it. It's got great characters or something. Just so children pick up that parents love reading too, that parents value reading, that reading is a worthwhile activity. And mom and dad do it too. But you'll have a fun time if you all can get in this. Maybe one night a week is all you can do, and that's great. A family reading night. And, we celebrate it afterwards with popcorn because we're all reading together in the same room, but we're all reading our own things. And there's nothing wrong with a child who cannot read yet, a toddler, having a stack of 5 books and reading their book, right, by going through the pictures. That's so good for children. Family reading nights is another suggestion. For children who struggle with reading, but I think for any child, a good activity is to read with your child. I suggest for my dyslexic students that parents trade off reading a book. So a book that is at a child's reading level, sometimes for children who struggle or who don't enjoy reading, maybe, it's just so cumbersome to go through a book with an adult right there. So go back and forth. How about I read a page, you read a page? Some of my students, that's just too much for them. It's overwhelming. How about I read a paragraph, you read a paragraph, or I'll read a sentence, you read a sentence, or let's read these sentences in this paragraph together. And so they're listening to you read and they're trying to chime in. So try that. reading something that is at their level. If it's above their level, it's going to be, I think, frustrating for them, but something that's in their genre that they enjoy. Do they like biographies? Do they like, I would be very careful with what I call pop culture books. And I'll talk about that in a second, but it gets some good quality stuff in their hands, and it's at their level that they would enjoy, and take turns going back and forth with reading. That is a very, very fun activity, especially for our ones who struggle with reading and they don't feel like it's all on them. Questions? Okay, I'm going to keep going, but I want you, Kirsten, interrupt me anytime. So what about the library? Let's talk about that a little bit. When you take your child to the library, you're sending a message. Books and reading are important. And I think there's no better way to do that than make it a family event once a week, whatever you can do. And as soon as a child is old enough, and they don't have to be very old these days, to get their own library card, boy, that builds confidence in a child like crazy, right? You have your own library card, you can check out books. So do that. And it's a lot less expensive than trying to buy a lot of children's books. You can access a lot of books at the library. But I'm going to caution you, this is where we're going to talk about the quality of books. I want you to know that some of this is research-based and some is Holly's opinion. So I want you to know that up front, okay? If you don't agree with something, it's okay. So the way I look at the quality of children's books in general, but especially children's, is like food. I look at it that way. There is junk food that tastes so good, so sweet in our mouths, goes down so easily. We can have a lot of it. It doesn't do our bodies or our minds necessarily a lot of good, but they're easy and it's good. It's fun. It's fun to have junk food. There are foods that we probably have to train ourselves and our children to eat that are better for us. That's kind of how I look at books. There's a lot of junk in all libraries, school and public. I really believe that. I am not going to tell you that you need to be in there like a Gestapo and, reporting to the librarian every book that you find that you don't think is suitable for children or your child. Please don't do that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying advocate for your children. So you can steer your children away from and towards quality literature and quality children. I mean, it could be quality picture books. There's a lot of junk out there, cartoon books. I think the graphic novels have found a new place in our libraries. And the argument I most often hear from librarians and families and teachers is, well, they like them, they're interested. Well, I really do believe, and again, you may not agree, I really believe that you can help your child develop interest in more quality books. Literally, literacy wise, so good, strong words, vocabulary, sentence syntax. Graphic novels don't provide very much for our kids. Now, if your children are reading great stuff all the time and you want to use graphic novels or cartoon books, Disney books, as a treat every once in a while, sure, that's great. But they're not going to build your child's literacy skills. So just know that. Also, look for books. There are so many. We have a plethora of wonderful children's books these days. Oh my goodness, they're so well written, beautifully illustrated. But here's some things to look for. Look for content. So is it a history or a geography book? Is it about science or music or art? Reading about people. I think that's fantastic for children to read good, healthy biographies. Those can inspire children, I think, in a way that a few other books can. And there are many biographies written for children these days. Read the book yourself. Do you think this book is inspiring? Is it about good, wholesome things? Do the bad people, get their due at the end, so to speak? Does right win over wrong, good over evil? If those things are important to you, if they are, as an adult, then check your child's books for those kinds of things. Beautiful illustrations. Oh my goodness. I know children who have been so inspired in their own artistic ability and their own art, creativity by just seeing beautiful, not necessarily about artists, but it could be, but beautiful illustrations in books. So many picture books are just beautiful that way. I think the main thing is where I encourage you parents to know what your children are reading. There are several years ago now, there was a series of books I won't name, but it was very, very popular. But in it was kind of a bratty child was the main character, very disrespectful to parents and disobedient and rebellious. And they were very popular books. I think for a lot of us, we just said, no, thank you. We'll find something different for our children. So I'm just encouraging you to be aware. And I am going to send that invite out to you in terms of your child's school library. Again, you don't have to go through and make a list of every book you disagree with, but visit your child's library, see what's there, encourage your child in the right directions. Here's a good section, my daughter, for you to look at to find a good book for you. So those kinds of things are really, I think, important. And also, children are amazingly intuitive at quite a young age. Talk to your children about the why does it matter that we want quality books? Why does it get your child's feedback on that? What makes the difference? And so they may just start to become at an early age their own kind of connoisseurs of what good literature looks like. They can identify and they can name some things that maybe they want to stay away from. Things that are not good food for their minds, if you will. The other thing I want to talk about before we get into this whole dyslexic area, which I know is a hot topic these days and very interesting to me. I would say be present while your child does his or her homework. We are so busy. We're all so busy. I don't know anybody who's not busy. When you have children, you've got layers of busyness. If you could make it a goal for yourself as much as possible to be present in the room, not in the room, be present next to your child or in front of your child when they're doing their homework. You can learn so much about your child, what frustrates them, where their skills are, where their deficits may be. In literacy, we say the last thing a child hears and the last thing they see should be the correct version. So if they read the word from as form, very common with our kiddos, there should be somebody there to correct them. If your child is taking 2 hours to do a 15-minute assignment, boy, that is huge. You need to let your teacher know. I know my kiddos that I work with that are dyslexic. It takes them forever. And when they do their math, especially if there's word problems or multiplication facts, it takes them forever. And so what happens, I hear from parents a lot, is that it's an excruciating evening of frustration and crying and nagging and just trying to get the kids and to do their homework, when in fact, probably if it's taking that long, there's more to the story, and you need to maybe have a conference with a child's teacher. And if it's supposed to take 15 minutes, it should take about 15 minutes. That's a really, really big thing. Now, if you're cooking and your child is sitting in the living room and you can't see what they're working on or how they're doing it or whatever, again, we're talking ideal situations, so please know that when I talk. Just try to be present, right there with them. Hopefully it won't be a huge amount of time commitment on your time, but it is time well spent with your child, not doing their homework for them. You're not there to answer their questions. unless they need it, right? But you're there just kind of as an observer, making sure that they're reading words correctly. And there's nothing wrong with saying that word was from, not form, or what a sum is. What is a sum? What's a sum in math? So we find that our children who are really struggling with reading also generally struggle with math. And that's because so much of math is language. And that's what our dyslexic kids are struggling with. Okay, let me stop before I get into the whole dyslexia world and what happens when your child struggles and all that, and get some questions from you. And also, please feel free. I would love to hear from you, your ideas about how you encourage, you work on alphabet, you encourage maybe a time that you have found is just a really good time to work on those kinds of skills as a family, or ideas at dinner time, or whatever it is you have, your creative ideas.
So Holly, this is so good. Families are sharing mostly in the chat, just book recommendations, but then
Okay.
they're also asking you if you have a list of like classic literature for different ages that you recommend, or any book recommendation.
Well, as a true professional, I don't create it myself. I borrow from those who have done before me. There's a really good book called Honey for a Child's Heart. Honey for a Child's Heart. It is so good. It has recommendations of good quality books by age. And I think it's fantastic. I mean, it's a big, thick book. There's a lot there. So when in doubt, go to those who know, right? That's a really, really good one off the top of my head. There's an author named Jim Trelease. His last name is Trelease. And he's written a lot about the value on the child's brain of reading to a child, if you want to kind of pursue that a little bit too. There are quite a few now different publishers who publish children's classics, and there's also a whole nother set of publishers who publish classics and children's literature, but at a lower reading level. And so your child might read, I don't know, Little Women or something, but they might be a sixth grader, but they might be she might be reading at a second grade level. And those books are written with the plot intact, some of the vocabulary, but they're written at a much easier level for the children. And those are great if you can get your hands on those. And again, Google those. There is, let me think. There is a series called High Noon Books, High Noon Publication, and they have a lot of older children themes, but written at a younger, easier to read level, for instance. But I think if you Google those, but I think that as far as just quality, books, I think that Honey for a Child's Heart is a great resource, just excellent.
So no question.
Ask a question.
Ask a question.
Actually, I was going to share, not ask a question. Sorry.
Yes, please.
When I homeschooled, I don't homeschool anymore, but when I did, I felt like I had a lot more time to read to the kids. Now that they're in school, it's really a struggle. But something that when I homeschooled that I did was to keep everyone's interest is they had a notebook and could color. Basically, I tried to get them to color about the story that I was reading so that they could imagine it and try to get it down on paper. And I felt like everyone really heard the story.
That's great. And it's also really good for comprehension. In addition to saying what happened in the book, what was the plot, whatever, you could say, draw me your favorite part and tell me what was going on there. Yeah, that's great, Holly. Thank you.
So no more questions. Just people have been writing just different things that help them to connect with their child through reading. in the chat.
Okay. Well, I would love to hear some of those out loud. If some of you who wrote in the chat wouldn't mind just sharing out loud.
Anastasia, would you want to share what you said was so good?
Sure. I'm driving and almost home, but I can talk. I have a third grader who I actually had to pull out of a high-end private school and put into a charter because she's too smart for the school. So they made her an individual education plan. They actually just tested her, and she's testing at 6th, 7th grade reading level as of last week when they did their testing, and doing like 5th grade math. So she is double exceptional. So she's brilliant and then also has ADHD. So she is super smart, but then can't focus long enough to show you she's smart. So like in contrast, she's like failing math in 3rd grade, but then when they test her, she's brilliant. So we finally came up with the solution. Like when we do homework, I make her sit and focus long enough to do like 3 long multiplication or 3 long division problems. And then when she can prove to me she can do it, right, then I let her dance, jump, move, and then I just read. So I'm like, okay, well, we're dividing 3 into 100. So how many times does 3 go into 10? And then she'll like shout it out, and I'll write the answers for her. And I just let the teacher know, like, hey, it's in my handwriting, but you like have to trust that I'm making her do it. But like, she cannot sit here. Like, I mean, you were saying it was taking some kids hours. Like it would take her 2 hours to do 10 math problems because she could not focus long enough. And then we just fight. So it was just easier to make her focus for 2 or 3, prove she knew the process, and then me just read them off to her through the process and then write the answer she tells me. So that was helpful for us. And then like homework, we get home so late tonight and make dinner. Like I'll typically FaceTime a friend or my dad, and they will do homework with them over FaceTime because they're on the East Coast. So they get connection time with family and friends. And then I still can like get other things done with the other kids. So sometimes dividing and conquering and thinking outside the box, like at this point, my almost 6th grade son's math, like I don't remember how to do it. So I call my IT dad, and he like knows it all. So he like, sometimes it helps to like gain those resources and divide and conquer, and not, especially with multiple kids, you don't have to do it all for all of them.
Right. Those are great strategies. Thank you.
I don't know if you have any recommendations for like family read-alongs, like, or for family books that maybe even you could get 3 different ages engaged, or maybe you're just classical literature, but if there's anything specific that you can think of.
Well, I know my daughter is in Fort Collins, and she homeschools her 3 kids, and they're the youngest is 4 and the oldest is 12, I think. And they just read together. She and her husband read to the kids, but Swiss Family Robinson is a fun one to read. Even the little ones can get the gist of it. Yeah, I would look in that book for, that's the only thing I can think of. I know there's plenty. There's plenty there.
Can I make a suggestion? Just
Sure.
Homeschool Mom, one podcast website that I really enjoy is called the Read Aloud Revival. And she has a podcast dedicated to reading out loud as a family. So she has authors on there. She shares strategies for reading out loud. And just like building a love of literacy in your family. But she also on her website posts like, these are our favorite picture books for February. These are our favorite February read alouds. These are some of our best classics, like divided by boys and girls, different age groups. So that's an awesome resource to check out. That's totally free.
Say it again, the Read Aloud?
Read Aloud Revival.
Okay. Good. That's great.
And you can never go wrong with Little House on the Prairie.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, our children still talk about when we used to go camping, we would always for some reason, we would always take the Laura Ingalls Wilder books and read by flashlight. That was a very fun bonding time together, right?
So for my daughter, she's only 6. And she's reading, but she's still learning. So in order to if I made her like read a whole book, it would eventually become like, I don't know, like a chore for her, and I want her to enjoy it. So what we'll do is we'll take turns. Like I'll read a page so she gets into the story. But if she wants us to finish the story, she has to read the next page and we take turns.
That's great.
But there's no other specific questions, but if anybody does have a question, they want to just speak it instead of write it.
I was just going to give feedback also. I have 6 children. And so sometimes mom can't be the one reading because mom is doing whatever, but have one of the older ones read to the younger ones or all of them together. And that's a way to get everybody involved. And it's just a fun to be able to share your favorite stories or get them interested in something else that they wouldn't have been because they're a girl versus a boy. And so that's another way that you can do it if you have more than one child and you're driving and you can't read, but you don't want to use an audiobook. You want to actually utilize each other or take advantage of the benefits God's given you. He's given you many, so utilize all of them and their gifts.
Right. And there is research to substantiate that both the older child and the ones listening benefit. It's good for all of them. So what a great idea. Thank you, Tanya, for sharing that. You said, was there another one, Kirsten, that was a specific question you said?
No, there hasn't been, just
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what happens when your child seems to be struggling. Okay. So dyslexia is a reading struggle. We say it's a struggle with reading and writing in a sea of strengths. So if a child has had good teaching, fair teaching, and they're just not making the connection, they're not what we say breaking the code of reading, but they are strong in all kinds of other areas, maybe gifted in sports or art or music or math even, but they just are really struggling in that reading, writing. It's possible that they could be dyslexic. Generally, students are evaluated for dyslexia starting at about first grade. What happens is with these particular, let me say up to 1 in 5 people, I'm going to use the word people instead of just students, people have dyslexia, but they have it on a continuum. So it might be very slight, they might be severely impacted. So in kindergarten, a child might be just having struggles with their learning her ABCs, for instance. And I taught kindergarten for years, and I have to confess that I was ignorant in this area for a long time. And I gave parents, I think, what I would now consider bad advice. I would say, they'll catch up second semester. Well, a small gap in kindergarten, if it's a real learning disability, it doesn't just go away with teaching. And so think of the game, you all know the game Jenga, where you stack the wood. Well, think of those basic reading skills as the bottom blocks. And so what happens in reading, if a child is struggling in reading, then she goes to first grade, and without somebody remediating those gaps, we just add skills on first grade style. And then she goes to second grade, and then they add more difficult skills in reading on. And if there is a weak foundation, then eventually it crumbles. We usually see kids really fall apart about third and fourth grade. Those little small gaps in kindergarten grow and grow, and at third grade and fourth grade, they are struggling so badly. It's very common, sadly, for children to tell me they don't like themselves, they know they're stupid. Even more sad in my mind are some parents, but some educators who say, tell these children you're lazy, or you're not trying hard enough, or you're not focusing. And it's they're trying probably harder than all the other kids in the classroom, but they have a learning disability. Some parents choose to get their children evaluated. It's not cheap. It's an expensive venture. There are not a lot of places, but some in the Springs here in the area who will evaluate. Once a child has been found to have dyslexia, it's not something that's cured. It's not something that they grow out of it. They have it their whole lives. But with general tutoring and general repetition is not what these children need. Dyslexic children need very, very, very specific interventions, and there are a handful of them. They need to be these words like systematic, explicit, multisensory, sequential, hands-on, all this stuff. It's not just any tutoring. If you do think your child might have dyslexia, you don't have to get them evaluated. Many parents, in fact, I tutor a kiddo now whose mom read up on it her own, and she said, I don't want to spend the money, but I'm positive from what I've read and researched that my child is dyslexic. There is a strong family inherited quality. Most often, if there is a dyslexic parent or a child who maybe never was diagnosed or evaluated for dyslexia, just struggled in reading, there is a 50% chance that at least one of the children will have it. Again, on a continuum, might be slight, might be severely impacted. And again, up to 1 in 5 is a lot. I have parents all the time who say, oh my gosh, that was me, but nobody ever diagnosed me. That was me, but I'm seeing through my child's eyes, and I didn't know. I thought I was stupid. I thought I was lazy, whatever. It's quite a journey. It is quite a journey for these children. If a child, on the other hand, is struggling, and let's say they were in a school where the kindergarten and first grade teachers just really they didn't know how to teach reading. And there's a word I didn't make up, but I like it. It's called dystechia. It's not a real thing, but it means when a child hasn't had good teaching. Well, they might not have dyslexia, because dyslexia only happens when a child struggles. Although they've had the good teaching, they're still struggling. So it's very possible that a child just hasn't had good teaching and maybe needs to move to a charter school or homeschool or a different school, whatever, and to have good teaching. So I want you to understand that as well. Every child who struggles doesn't have dyslexia, but many do. So you know what IEPs are. IEPs are individual education plans. They're provided to children with a learning disability, and way more than half of children with IEPs with a literacy struggle are dyslexic, whether they have been diagnosed with it or, I don't like to use the word diagnosed, I like evaluated better, whether they've been evaluated or not. So how do you know? Well, there are checklists that are available. If any of you want one, I can definitely give it to you. I cannot diagnose or evaluate a child for dyslexia, but there are parent checklists that are things that you've just noticed. Sometimes they're preemies, sometimes they're late to speak and have difficulty with forming their language. So there are some things that you can fill out. And again, there's so much great information online now. The International Dyslexia Association is a wonderful resource for you if you at all suspect or are just wondering how to navigate through this whole journey. It's a journey. It is interdys.org. So I'll spell that interdys.org. And they have parent question. I mean, it's an amazing site. They have, how do you find a therapist? How do you know if your child is dyslexic? What if they're ADHD and dyslexic? Let me talk about a couple of what it's a fancy thing, and I'll just use words and I'll tell you it's not necessary, but comorbidities, which are things that happen alongside dyslexia. There is something called dysgraphia. which is difficulties in writing. So it's specifically handwriting. And that's when a child has difficulty keeping their lines all, or excuse me, keeping the letters all on a line. Some are floating up in the air, some go below. They're all different sizes. So most often people think of dyslexic students as reversing letters. That is not the case, okay? Not the case. It's very, very common, but it's not true. All children reverse letters when they're younger, when they're first learning to write. And so this is not, if your child is reversing letters, it doesn't mean that they have dyslexia, he or she has dyslexia, but it could be, but it's not the telltale sign. It's a phonological disorder, which means in the brain, they have a disconnect and they learn differently than other students in terms of understanding that alphabet letters make certain sounds. I hope that's understandable to you. It's a symbol, written symbol to sound breakdown. So reading happens on the left side of the brain. And that's where we see that a lot of our dyslexic students' brains look different. And I think I even gave a slide to Melissa here for your availability. But what happens with our dyslexic students is simply they just learn differently. And so this is fewer areas in the brain light up for reading. But on the other side of the brain, where there are higher, what we call executive skills, these kids are brilliant. They're intuitive, they're creative, artistic. We see more lighting up on this side of the brain. And so when I offer dyslexia therapy, I always say we don't put a Band-Aid on. We are literally changing the brains to connect things that weren't. These children merely learn differently. Nothing wrong with them. In fact, most often they're amazing kids, and it's one of the many reasons I love working with them. They're just incredible, intuitive. I mean, they just think at higher levels than I can do, I think. But they need specific intervention. Just any old tutoring does not work. So that is something that you need to know if you want to. Again, you can pursue this on your own. You can start with your pediatrician, and I always say, and express concerns if you think there's a possibility of a learning disability like dyslexia, and go from there. So there's dysgraphia, which is problems also with reading and with writing. There's something called, ready? Dyscalculia, which is dyslexia and math issues. And like I said before, so much of math is language-based. A dyslexic child will often have a problem memorizing. Multiplication tables is one of the classic most hated chores for any dyslexic student. I mean, it's so hard for them. So there could be dyscalculia. Many of our dyslexic students have ADHD, and I want to talk a little bit about that. So it used to be that we thought of ADHD as hyperactivity. My child just cannot sit still for long. They just can't focus. They can't sit still. Now we know that ADHD is a broader area. It means it's about the focus. So a child might sit there and never move, but they might just drift off. You might see their eyes kind of drifting off. I have some students like this. They just go to another world for a few minutes and then they come back. It's still attention, and it still gets in the way of their learning often. And there's a whole discussion. What do you do if your pediatrician has told you that your child has ADHD? Do you put them on meds? And there's that whole mess. That's a whole other discussion. I'm going to simply say that would not be a first suggestion for any parent. However, I have seen in many years of teaching, a few children get on meds, and out of their own mouths, they say, wow, I can focus now. So you parents get to make those tough decisions. So often we see dyslexia alongside ADHD. That is not uncommon at all. And often dyslexia is misdiagnosed because it can look like other things like autism, perhaps. So you really need to get a good test, a good evaluation if you decide to go that way. So let me see. Let me take some questions because we had some earlier about what do you do if you think your child is behind or dyslexia or whatever.
So a question I had, I was wondering if you could explain to me the auditory processing part, because I do have a dyslexic daughter,
Okay.
but I feel like she has a really big struggle, not only in reading, but hearing. Like if you say a word she's not familiar with, like she can't even remember that word. So if it's like a teacher who has kind of a weird last name, she can't bring that word up again. And
Right.
I can tell that there's some sort of auditory processing issue going on, but I don't know how they're connected.
Right. It's a good question, and I'm not an expert. There's something called auditory processing disorder, APD, and it could be comorbid again with dyslexia. But I will say that it is really common for our dyslexic students to not their hearing acuity is okay, but they don't hear it and translate it, I guess. So very often our kids will say Paschetti. That's a dyslexic thing. They will often they just can't get the word out correctly. So I don't think that's particularly uncommon for a dyslexic student, but there is another layer of a disability that she may or may not have called APD. And I just went to a seminar just recently because I don't know about it enough, and it's really, really fascinating. APD has a lot to do with not being able to pick out sounds, like when there's a crowd, not being able to just discern the sounds, not being able to discern the individual sounds of spoken letters. They hear it differently. So again, I'm sorry, I'm not an expert on that. I know they can be comorbid, and I know APD is a thing. I mean, it can really affect a child's learning. I do have one. I mean, the professor who led this seminar that I went to, he has a book, and I mean, if you're interested in learning more, I can get that to you. So let me know.
I had never heard of that. So
yeah,
that would be good. And then to follow up on that,
sure.
So she is in tutoring, and she's been in tutoring for 2 years doing like an Orton Gillingham type method. Is that what you recommend?
Yep. There is a sort of an umbrella. Orton Gillingham were two physician and an audiologist actually way back many, many years ago. And that's kind of an umbrella. And under that, there's several programs. Take Flight is the one I use. That's under it. Slingerland, Linda Mood Bell. There's several. And there's just a program. I'm sorry, Holly, say it again.
Barton.
Oh, Barton. Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like you're doing the right thing. Are you seeing improvements in your daughter's reading?
Yes, but it's very slow.
It is.
So,
I mean, my program, Take Flight, not mine, but the one I use with the kids I'm doing it twice a week or 3 times a week for 3 years. I mean, this is not we're changing the brain.
yeah, no, I mean, she definitely is progressing, but it definitely is one step forward, 2 steps back kind of a deal.
Right.
And that's hard in a school because everyone else is surpassing her,
Right. Yes, I understand that struggle. What other questions do you have about this whole area?
I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So I have 6 children, and 5 of them are great. They're obviously the 7-year-old is not a great reader, but he's reading. And my 3-year-old, I'm wondering when do you realize, like, how can you know? Because I do have nieces and nephews that definitely have it.
Oh, okay.
But personally, in my own household, I've not seen it. And so how would I know with these 2 younger ones?
Right. I wish I had a formula for you. Most often, I can tell you the mothers have this 6th sense gut feeling that something is not right. You can see things as early as 3 and 4.
And so
Although
what
they're
kind
not
of thing, what kind of things do you see at
things
3 and
like
4?
they can't learn to spell their name, or
Mhm.
no matter how many times I recently taught kindergarten, and I'm sure she's dyslexic. There was a child who just could not learn her alphabet, and her mom was so frustrated. Work with her 5 letters at a time, A B C D E, A B C D E, over and over and over and over. And she looked like she had it. And then an hour later, it was as if she was never presented. So it's those kind of things that should be age appropriate, that they're just struggling with, despite you're working so hard or a lot of exposure to that particular things. Could be some oral language things. Like I said, there are children who just get their syllables and words mixed up a lot. That could be something. Again, there's a strong familial inheritance. Excuse me.
When my dyslexic son, and I started to realize that he was probably dyslexic when he was pretty young. And one thing that he really could not do, one was remember the names of letters. Like F was always fee, G was the geege. Like he could not get the name of that letter out. And
Right.
he could not rhyme. Like he couldn't hear rhymes. Or if I said, okay, something that rhymes with cat, he could never give me a word that rhymed with cat. That just the concept of rhyme, which little kids, preschool age, they totally understand. He could not do that.
Right. That's a phonemic awareness piece. Or if you said, say the word playground, tell me playground without the play ground. They can't separate those. Yeah. Again, if you want to leave your name, I can give you some materials to look. There's Dr. Hugh Katz is an expert in kind of early intervention, and I have a PDF that I can send to you if you let me know, and email me and I'll get it to you. Just things that parents notice early on. But I think, like Raquel said, talking to other parents who may have gone through a similar journey and what they experience is also super helpful. And you're not alone. Oh my gosh, you are not alone.
I have a question. I have a first grader, 6 years old. He was delayed speech. We went through speech therapy. We recently switched schools from a charter school to a public school.
Okay.
He's, I'd say, iffy with reading. He's still iffy with reading. His teacher says the biggest struggle he has is going from reading the board or reading the paper next to him and then having to write it down to make it to bring the word from one paper to a new paper. And she's like, maybe you have suggestions for me. I'm like, you're the teacher. I don't know anything how to bring it from here to here for him.
Yeah.
So that he can read it now and have it be legible in front of him when he wrote it.
Right. And how is his handwriting?
Like that of a 6-year-old.
Okay. A 6-year-old boy?
He definitely, he's a boy. I mean, he definitely still mixes his E's are backwards, his 3's are backwards, his D's and S's and, B's are
Very
backwards.
typical. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
so it is an extremely challenging brain task to copy from a board. That is so hard. And we don't really teach our children how to do that. We just say, do it. Right. And so some kids have it really hard. I can tell you with my students, younger students that I've worked with, I actually start really, really small. Like I will write 2 letters on the board and they write 2 letters on their paper. And we do that over and over again. Then I put 5 letters on the board and they have to. Now in first grade, you may be able to do that at home and kind of help train him. But in first grade in class, they're not going to be able to probably have the time to do that. I think having the copy as close to his paper. So he should never write from the board. He should write I'm using shoulds. If a teacher has time she can make a copy of what's on the board, and your son can copy from the paper that's right next to his writing paper. And if he has to cover up all the words except for two, that's all he sees because the rest are covered up with the paper, do that. We always say back up to a point where the skill to a point where a child can feel successful. And it sometimes you have to back up pretty far. Often though, Lisa, it's because they've never been taught in that skill, and it's assumed that they have it, and all children don't. You could practice those things at home with him. If depends on the teacher, if she's open to ideas from you, and if she feels like she has time, I would make that suggestion for her to. He only copies from something that's right next to him, and use another piece of paper to cover up everything but what, and you would know whatever. If it's 2 words, it's 2 words. If it's 1 word, it's 1 word. Whatever he can do, and then he moves the paper for the next word. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and one of my other, I'm wondering because he went from a school that strictly from the beginning taught cursive to now a school that's only teaching print. So it's almost like he's relearning the alphabet and how it's written and how it sounds, and even his reading. The reading books are night and day from each other. So it's almost like he had to take a huge step backwards.
Yeah. So let me just say just a comment about cursive. We have found, we who do research and I who read their research, they have found that it is easier for dyslexic children or children with dysgraphia, right, handwriting issues, to use cursive. And the reason is when you print, every time you print a letter, you pick up your pencil and your brain has to figure out, where do I put it down again? Whereas in cursive, they figure that out once, they write the word, then they pick up their pencil again. And so like in Take Flight, the one I use, we teach, I start with halfway through first grade, but second grade, we teach cursive to those children specifically for that kind of issue. So going back and forth, I'm sure is way complicated for your son. What district are you in?
I'm in District 11, but he was in a charter school beforehand that all my other boys went to that was strictly cursive.
Okay,
I
don't need to know the name, but what district was the charter school in?
It's also a D11.
D11. Okay, gotcha.
But I mean, he was doing really well at the charter school. And it was like he took so many steps backwards moving to the new public school.
Yeah.
And I know there's correlation between the writing and the reading programs are so different, but I just worry that he's struggling to catch up now where the other kids might have had that advantage because they were there in kindergarten already learning that program.
Okay, right. Boy, that is a tough part of being a parent in education, isn't it? With our 5 kids every year, we would, my husband and I would in March would go, okay, let's pray about where this one goes, where this one goes, where this one goes. And yeah. And we had charter school and homeschool and public school 1 year. Yeah. And those are tough and important decisions for us parents. So, yep.
Christina Morgan, would you want to share your question that you wrote in the chat?
Yeah, I can go ahead and do that. So my question was, my son was diagnosed with ADHD. We figured that he probably had it, and so we took him to a neurologist and got him officially diagnosed. But the neurologist said that he might also have another learning disorder. However, they want to just do the therapy and stuff for the ADHD and hold off on treating him, or I guess trying to find out what the other learning disorder might be. And I'm wondering if that's the wise course of action or if I should get a second opinion. Obviously, I know his ADHD needs to be managed, and we're not going to use meds. We're going to do therapy and stuff. But some of the stuff that we're talking about tonight, he has had trouble with, like the sounding of the letters. He would do sounds instead of the names. Took him forever to do his alphabet, and he's still struggling a little bit. He just got an assessment back and he's in kindergarten and he's still having trouble. And so I'm just wondering if maybe I should be getting a second opinion, I guess.
Did he get diagnosed by your pediatrician?
We took him, she recommended that we take him to a neurologist. And so he got,
Neurologist. Okay.
diagnosed from there.
I'm hesitant to suggest to you to advise you in any way that would cost you money because I don't want to do that. You have to, I think, make a decision in your family. It does, I will say this, it does sound like there's some dyslexic tendencies. And the fact is that ADHD and dyslexia often we see hand in hand. I guess it depends how much you want to know. I don't want to give you like legal advice or anything like that.
No, I totally get it.
I think if it were me, I just would want to know.
Yeah.
Most of the parents that I hear start with the whole dyslexia journey. They start with their pediatricians. I will say there are many, many, many pediatricians who don't admittedly know that much about dyslexia. Mm-hmm. There are testing places. Again, Christina, I think you might be a good person for me to maybe send that parent survey checklist thing off. That is not even a screening. It's certainly not an evaluation. And then I think maybe just doing your own little research on it. You have a lot of time.
Yeah.
Maybe looking at that International Dyslexia Association website.
Okay.
But I've heard parents say there's a lot online right now to help parents sort of navigate through that.
Okay.
Yeah. I hope that helps a little bit.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Of course.
I would like to add to that when you see your child, since I've just had a lot of kids, I have 9 children and I've had several with disabilities. And I find that even though knowing is helpful, you already kind of know, right? Like you see the problems, you see that they're not doing like the other kids do. And so even though getting them diagnosed and knowing is helpful, what's more helpful is just saying, okay, they're struggling. It's not going to hurt them to have therapy in an Orton Gillingham way, right? It's just going to help. And so I would say your money would be better spent, for me, at least as a mom who has gone through a lot of my kids being tested and things, that money's probably better spent just starting them on tutoring in those things, because it's not like that tutoring is going to harm them in any way.
No.
Doing.
Yeah, that's a good.
The last thing I want to say is I had very good success with my kids who are ADHD of going on the Feingold diet. So you can look that up and do that, but it's a lot, but I just want to say I had great success with it.
Holly, does that include gluten-free?
It does not, but it does it does suggest things that you can do, but it's mostly no artificial colors, flavors, preservatives. And then it does take salicylates out, or salicylates. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but it's an aspirin related compound that happens naturally in some fruits and vegetables. And they take those out at first just to see what the reaction is. And then you can put those back in later if they're not having reactions.
I have heard from lots of parents, not specifically for dyslexia, but ADHD and other attention problems, simply taking gluten out of their diet. It makes a difference too. And I'm sure that every person's, not just child, but person's individual chemistry is just that, so individual. But yes, I think, Holly, those are great suggestions.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Right. I will say that the dyslexia therapy is expensive. I mean, it's a 3-year commitment, and it's a monetary commitment. So, just to have you be fully aware of that too.
That's good to know. Thanks.
But Parents Challenge funds could certainly be used for dyslexia tutoring support. If you decide that your
Okay.
child needs that support, would be an excellent use of Parents Challenge funds.
Yeah, that
That's
makes
awesome. That's awesome. And what about Raquel for cost of the evaluation? Should a parent decide to go that way?
Melissa can probably answer that more specifically, but
Okay.
I'm almost certain that a dyslexia evaluation would be covered up to, everyone knows what their cap is for their amounts of funds that they can use.
Okay. If any, I was going to say, if anybody's interested, I can give you a couple of places where you can get an evaluation for your child for dyslexia. Should you decide to go that way, it is again not necessary. But if you want to, there is no shame to it. Well, you guys don't remember because you're young, but years ago in teaching, I remember when ADHD was first a thing. People didn't want their children to be diagnosed because they didn't want labels attached. Dyslexia seems like a thing. And Raquel, maybe you could tell me and Holly about that. But it doesn't seem like parents are so worried about the label. They're more concerned about let's get them whatever help they need.
Yeah, I think some of the stigma with dyslexia is falling off as people start to realize also just how common it is.
Yes.
And so I do think it's much less, I think the frustration now with dyslexia as a parent is just like, almost like the educators are not catching up and they're giving the same advice that you said at the beginning. Like, I wish I hadn't said this to families, like he'll catch up until the gap is so big. Now you're dealing with a lot more problems where actually, Christina's in this situation where her child is young and she's realizing he should probably know the alphabet, right? And be able to retain it. And it would be, I think, much more helpful if educators at that level could recognize the same signs. And instead of telling parents like, it's fine, he'll catch up, he's a boy, it's normal, until the gap is so big that you have so much to catch up from. I think that's maybe the frustration. But yeah, that's kind of just as a parent, I didn't feel any shame in getting my son the help that he needed. Now he's a great reader. So I'm glad I did it. So
very well said. Thank you, Raquel. And I will say that there are many more children who need therapy than there are therapists who are trained. And I think I worked at many schools, and there are a minimal amount of teachers, educators who know about it. And I don't feel like it's their fault. Our teacher colleges, I believe, are failing in training our teachers in college, not only about dyslexia, but how to teach structured reading. It's not the teacher's faults, but I would say most teachers don't know. They don't have an understanding. And I hear parents all the time getting advice from teachers that I know because I've been fortunate enough to learn more. It's just not true. It's not true advice, but that's what they're getting because the teachers just don't know. What's the answer? I don't know. I'm not sure about that. But I will say that the strongest advocate for every dyslexic child I've ever worked with has been the mom, hands down, every time.
I would also say that it has helped my daughter. So I'm dyslexic. And so I've been able to empathize with her. I've been able to say, I know that that's a struggle. And sometimes your brain you tell your brain to do one thing, but it doesn't. But I do feel like telling her that she's dyslexic has helped her not feel stupid. That's helped her understand she just has a disability and that it's not something that's going to go away. And so you have to learn how to deal with it, how to compensate for it, and things like that.
I also found there's some great books out, some research about the strengths of people with dyslexia, like you mentioned. And so helping my son find, he's starting to realize like, I'm really good at this. It's because I'm dyslexic, right? Rather than like the things that he struggles with. But like, did you see this Lego thing I built? I'm dyslexic. Like there's things I can do that you can't do. And it's actually like, I think the book that I read was The Dyslexic Advantage. But there's another one about like dyslexia superpower stuff. And there are things that he does that just blow me away. Like, how did you do that so quickly?
Right. Right.
Yeah. So that's another way to kind of, I guess, take the stigma away from being different.
There is research that says that as early as first grade, children know when they're behind in reading, and their self-esteem is starting to be damaged as early as 6 years old. And wow, yeah. So you parents, can I just share one more thing, and then I'm going to let you go on the chance, unless you have questions, but on the chance that you might find a few minutes to read to your children before they go to bed tonight.
Holly, may I ask one quick question?
Sure.
And thank you for all of the information on what you've shared. It's been awesome. But Orton Gillingham method, it is used at the school where my kids go and all of that. But I'm curious, are there courses here in Colorado Springs that we could take if we wanted to learn more about how to effectively teach that method?
The only one that I know of, well, okay, I'll say two. There is one, Susan Barton, that is a lot of it. Parents can learn it and they can give therapy for their own children. A lot of parents really find it very helpful. I have found that it's not as thorough as some other programs. The one that I went through is the one I recommend the strongest, but it's a super big commitment. It's through Colorado College, and it's a master's level, 2 years. And we put in 700 hours of practice, which you could do with your own child. Dr. Lynn Fitzhugh, Fitzhugh. To me, she's the guru here in our area. She is fantastic, and she has students all the time that go through it. And that's the one I went through. And I told her she changed my life because I never felt that I quite had the tools. So those are a couple. I know I took the Orton Gillingham class, but it was offered through the school I was teaching at in District 20 at the time.
Okay, so Colorado College, Dr. Lynn
Yes.
Fitzhugh. Well, I mean, I'm interested in a good, because I also
thorough.
teach at my kids' school, and we have multiple dyslexic students. And so while I know kind of a little bit about the method, I'm not an expert. So I would be interested in learning more of that collegiate level course, so I can effectively teach the kids that we have.
Yeah, it is worth every penny. It is. I mean, I just think it's the best program, and you learn about not just the program. You don't just learn the intervention. You learn about structured language and stuff. After I taught for 20 years, I never knew. Why didn't anybody teach me this before? I think it's invaluable if that's the direction you want to go.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I want to throw out one more thing. I am involved with a small group of people. We are trying to get a program for dyslexics going as of this coming August. It is specifically for dyslexic homeschool students. The way it works is we are going to put this together. It's called Literacy First, and it's authorized through BOCES, which is an educational authorization entity. And the way it's going to work, we hope, is that we're going to work, we therapists can work with groups of children, so it's not one-on-one therapy, groups of children up to 1 to 5. And if the student is not enrolled in a public school or any other entity that gets state funds, we are going to, the plan is for the state to pay for the therapy for parents. And that's a huge, huge thing. So, I charge an amount every, 2 times a week for 3 years. And this program would allow homeschool students that are dyslexic or have those tendencies to be enrolled in a program for 9 months or whatever and have the state pay for the therapy. So we're really excited about that. And we're putting in our application soon, and we're hoping to get authorized in the next month. And I know many of you are committed to your schools, no matter what they are, and that's great. But if you know of anybody, spread the word. And at the end here, there's an information sheet with my name and contact information. If you know of anybody who might be interested, we feel like the homeschool community is really a community that doesn't have a lot of choices and doesn't have a lot of chances for the intervention, like as you know, some of your children are getting in your school, in their schools. So just throw that out as an extra thing. It's another choice, another opportunity, we hope, for homeschool parents specifically.
Can I just a clarifying question? So this would be like the same way that some of the districts offer 1 day a week enrichment programs that are paid for through the state. So this would take the place of that, since a child can be only enrolled in one of those. Is this would technically
Exactly
be an
right.
enrichment program? Okay.
Yeah. It's a homeschool HSE homeschool enrichment, but yes, we can only state will only pay for the funds, to one school entity. So this would be, and it would be 4 days a week. So for an hour and 15 minutes, 4 days a week. Yeah. So I mean, I feel like it's we're excited about it, and we'll see what the interest is.
If your child is enrolled in a private Christian school, then could they still do it then?
Absolutely.
What times were you thinking you were going to have the 4 hours a day? Do
We
you guys have that set up yet?
4 hours a week.
4 hours
4
a
days.
week. Oh,
4
4
days.
hours a week.
Each therapist will set up their own schedule, and we'll have at least 2 of us, and I will be the director, and I will be providing the intervention as well. So we're looking at getting 3 therapists. I know 2 of us right now. So I can't tell you, Tanya, it really just depends. I think my personal hours are going to be sort of middle of the day hours, like 12 to 2-ish, I think. But again, we're not quite that detailed yet. We want to really see what the interest is. But I just think it's a niche that's not being served well. So, but yeah.
Where would we find out more information about that?
Email me.
Okay.
I think we will gather up the information and we'll send it out to all the participants tonight. Everything that she mentioned that you might want, we'll make sure that everybody gets that.
Okay.
Melissa
sounds
will
good.
forward that along.
Okay. And then you have, I think somebody was going to share my contact information at the end if nobody has any more questions or comments.
I have one more question. On your personal tutoring that's not going to be with these people, right now I have who Grace is getting tutoring through is a teacher at the school that I'm paying her like as a tutor, and she goes during the school day. Do you or any of your therapists, do you think that you would have time or interest in going into a school as a paid tutor?
Can I ask what school it is?
It's Evangelical Christian.
Oh, ECA. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
It was just kind of a personal setup. Like I just asked her to do that. But she's moving over to the secondary now, and I'm kind of looking for someone else to take up that spot.
I don't know. I can tell you that we're full, most of us. Everybody I know that is a take flight therapist, I get calls literally every day for a parent begging me to take their child, and I'm pretty filled up myself. And they only call me after, because my name starts with V, they go down a list and I'm kind of at the end of the list. There, like I said, there are not enough therapists. Elizabeth, we need you, because there are so many children who need help. It's just not there. So that's a sweet setup you have. Very sweet.
Yeah, that's been awesome.
Well, let me just say thank you to all of you who have hung in here for this whole thing. And I hope that you have taken away. I always think when I go to a session of any kind, if I could just take a couple of gems. So I hope you have a couple of gems that you are able to take away and use with your own children, and maybe start discussions and get you thinking. So I appreciate your letting me speak, Parents Challenge people. And I hope to remain in contact with some of you if that is what is ahead for us. But I wish you the best, all of you, with your own children and your own journeys.
Thank you so much, Holly. That was wonderful. I'm going to share my screen with Holly's information. And then we're going to give out door prizes and take attendance. And Christina, if you can post the survey again in the chat, that would be great.